Good evening. This is Mark McNaught on Independence Live, and we're just about to show you a video that I made earlier today, about 30 minutes, speaking about corruption. And I just wanted to say a couple of things before the video begins. First of all, I've been communicating with Gordon Ross, IndyCar, and he plugged my video or my event before I did it, and he described that I would be talking about corruption in the context of buying off politicians, which is probably the most obvious way, but I didn't really speak about that this evening. But I will, within a couple weeks, I'll be speaking about that in much more detail. So I'll be speaking about corruption in three different contexts that you'll see: electoral and information. Mark McNaught on Independence Live, and we're just about to show you a video that I made earlier today. Sorry, just cutting off the feedback. About 30 minutes speaking about corruption. And I just wanted to say a couple of things before the video begins. First, sorry, just cutting off the feedback again. So what I'll be speaking about three forms of corruption in terms of electoral and information in public policy and in the media. I will not be speaking this evening about corruption in the context of buying politicians or campaign finance, but I will be. I promise I will be devoting a full episode to that in the very near future. So as we roll this video, I'll be speaking about those three forms of corruption, bearing in mind that there are the others. Please leave your questions at livestream.com/Independence Live. Independence Live, livestream.com/Independence Live. Please leave your questions there during the video, and I will be coming back after, and I'll be answering your questions and speaking more about this after. So David, please roll the video.
Good evening. This is Mark McNaught again on my second episode on towards a written Scottish secular Republican Constitution. And today I'm going to talk a little bit, go into more detail about constitutional provisions that could prevent corruption. And so I'm going to speak specifically about avoiding voting corruption, the corruption of information which informs policy, and corruption of public opinion through a corrupt press, and how through a constitution we could have a less corrupt press than Scotland currently enjoys, with barring very few limited exceptions. So, and part of my motivation of this is having studied the United States for so long, being American, and seeing how profoundly dysfunctional the United States government has become, both on the federal and the state level, and the degree to which they have been in all three of these areas, whether it be voting, information of public policy, and certainly the press, have become very corrupting influences on the American political system, to the degree that it's just and so I've come at this from a viewpoint of what could be put in a written Scottish constitution to make it less, to maybe not, if not eliminate corruption, make it as non-corrupt as is humanly possible, and try to. Now, I'm not pretending that the Constitution can change human nature, but as was put in Federalist 51, when you're speaking about the separation of powers, that ambition must be made to counteract ambition, and that this is a way in which in the same vein, the way that a constitution, in not so much in a separation of powers sense, but in a way that corruption can be minimized to the highest possible degree. I'm going to go through each of these in turn: voting corruption, information corruption that informs public policy, and also the public opinion corruption through a corrupt press. Now, first of all, voting. Now, in the United States, there has been expansions of the franchise over the past 150 years. At the beginning, the franchise was limited to white male Christians, landowning Christians, basically. And after the 16th Amendment was passed in the 1870s, that extended the franchise to blacks. Also, and then in the 1920 was the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. And then in 1965, you had the Voting Rights Act, which guaranteed much better the rights for the voting rights for blacks, and so. But more recently, we've seen in a lot of states the state governments passing very restrictive laws to make it more and more difficult to vote. And so I come from that as a perspective of how in an independent Scotland these voting could be an affirmative right and made as easy as possible. I don't think we need to go as far as making it necessarily mandatory as it is in some countries. However, voting does need to be as fair, accurate, as possible, and with automatic registration. Now, I've been watching IndyCar Gordon Ross quite a bit, and he's been speaking to a large degree about blockchain voting on the internet. Basically, I'm not a technically minded person in that respect, but as I understand it, these are a way. If you, for example, if you can have your bank account pretty secure, and then over the internet, and not have it hacked. And if it is hacked, there's relatively easy remedies to deal with it. The same could be true of voting. I witnessed I was at the Glasgow recount in the 2014 election, and while I don't have direct evidence of actual voter fraud, I can say for sure that there was broad scope for voter fraud. And I think that rather than if the same thing were to occur today, as happened in 2014, when there were so many questions about the recount, or the count in general, and the impossibility of a recount, or and I thought that, but it was always up to but the way that it was treated is that there was complaints to the police about voting irregularities, and it was the police to deal with it. And that just seems to me somewhat absurd. If you had a basic good system where people voted, they could vote online, they could vote anywhere they wanted to. If they wanted to go to the polls on polling day, they could. But you could be assured that your vote is secure, it's secret, as secret as your bank account is, at least, if not more, and you can verify that your vote was properly counted, and you could even count the votes yourself, having them listed, encrypted in a way so where everybody can see what their vote was, that make sure it was properly counted, and count for themselves if they so desire on the computer. This would have been impossible, 100 years ago, but the fact is that Scotland uses the same voting system as it has, it hasn't changed much since the 19th century, although the franchise has been expanded. So, but what the common theme that I want to run through all of these three aspects is that all of these things must be provably accurate. That it should not, for example, if there are voting discrepancies, it should not be incumbent upon the individuals who feel that their vote was miscounted or what have you, or lost or whatever. It should be upon the state or the voting system to prove that it is accurate, not to prove, because it's, of course, it's very difficult to prove with using a paper ballot that it was miscounted. I mean, it's just lost in a sea of other ballots, and there's no way of really knowing whether your vote was properly counted or what have you. I mean, and so if there was so in a constitution, you could have stipulations that there must be a voting system which uses the best technology of the day. We want this constitution to go well into the future, and for there to be, and so maybe blockchain won't be the best system in 10 or 20 years, but always have the best system that guarantees accuracy, verifiable accuracy by anybody who wishes to monitor it, and so that again, and also with regard to registration, there should be automatic registration from the time the Scottish citizen turns 16, and never to be revoked, even when they're in prison. Why not let prisoners vote? I mean, and people, if they're not in town, if they're abroad, they can vote as well. There could be instead of having for example, instead of having just one day that you go and vote, or postal votes, which are in the UK postal vote system is as I think there was a UN report that said it was childishly easy to defraud, and so I mean, and we saw with those accusations against Ruth Davidson as having saw the postal votes before. I mean, there's just infinite levels of scope for fraud within the system. Whether or not there was actual fraud in 2014, I can't prove, but for me, I shouldn't have to be able to prove it. The voting system should prove to me or to the citizens that it's accurate, not the other way around. And so I think that putting in a constitutional provisions that there has to be a provably accurate voting system with automatic registration, irrevocable registration, except for maybe certain conditions under the law. Maybe they decide that they don't want prisoners to vote, or certainly if people die and are off the register, they should not be on the register. I mean, these type of things. But again, these are things that are simple to do. I mean, it's given today's technology, and that whenever anybody's it turns out on the data system, when anybody turns 16, they're automatically registered. They're notified that they're automatically registered, and they should be able to vote for life in any of these elections. Also, perhaps extending the franchise to everyone who lives in Scotland can vote in any of the Scottish elections. For example, I'm a UK citizen living in France, but I can only vote in the European elections and in the local elections, the city elections. I can't vote in the legislative or presidential elections here in France. Why not in Scotland? Everybody can vote for everything. As long as you're a legal resident, a legal citizen, there shouldn't be any reason why you should not be able to fulfill your civic duties to the fullest extent possible. So there's no reason why they can't have these these types of provisions in there to guarantee equal protection and equal voting rights for all legal residents and citizens of Scotland. Okay, so that's the first one on voting, and again, there's just simply no reason why the UK has to serve. The UK systems have to serve as precedent, and that's once Scotland votes yes and begins to develop a written constitution of which what I'm proposing is only one option, and I encourage others to develop their own constitutions if they feel that they would like to have, for example, the Queen as the monarch continue to be head of state, write a constitution, get it in the conversation. The second one thing I want to talk about is the corruption of information which informs public policy. Now, I first of all want to, and I want to use the example of the recent fracking bill that was passed in the Scottish government, and I want to compliment the way on which they did it and the way in which the Scottish government addressed the issue was to follow the science. What were the peer-reviewed science articles about fracking? What does it show? What are the economics of it? What are all of these different aspects? And they followed the studies, and they decided that they ruled that fracking could never be safe. And they banned it. Now, this is as Gordon Ross was pointing out in a video earlier this week. This could be overruled by the Supreme Court of the UK, depending on if INEOS is trying to appeal this ruling and perhaps get it overturned. And if Scotland is in the UK, it could be overturned. And we have to see what happens with this power grab bill in the House of Commons, of whether they're going to take away all the powers from this government and maybe devolve some of them after it. And so that's a separate issue. But there is very possible that if this repeal bill goes through as as it is, even despite the legislative consent objections, that they could simply overturn the Scottish fracking ban and allow fracking in Scotland. There's no reason why they can't do that, so the studies that inform that, as I said, I think the Scottish government did very well in that, in letting the science inform the decision, and I think that is something that could be constitutionally mandated, that any information or study which is used to inform public policy must be peer-reviewed, it must have methodological integrity, and it must be demonstrably provable. So, for example, if a fracking firm wants to, or any other energy extraction firm wants to use some type of new technology for energy extraction, it is incumbent upon them to prove that it's safe. Now, I contrast this with the United States, where I would heavily recommend you watching Gasland and Gasland 2 by producer Josh Fox. I also have an interview with him on Independence Live. Just Google in Mark McNaught and Josh Fox, and you'll see the interview that I did with him back just after the Scottish government had imposed a moratorium on fracking, and this was but in any case, in the United States, it is, well, in many states they simply let fracking go through, and the Dick Cheney, when he was vice president under his energy task force or whatever they call it, they removed fracking from the Clean Water Act. So the fracking companies did not have to abide by the Clean Water Act. So in many states, some 30 states or so, where fracking is occurring, they are literally poisoning the water. You can see videos online of people lighting their tap water on fire. And and I don't think that's not something, and absolutely trashing the land, killing the livestock, poisoning the water. I mean, it's just unbelievable what they're able to get away with. And the states, just because the states are so, bought out by the petroleum industry, they just wave it through. And despite all of the objections, and another example of that was in Denton, Texas, where they had that, basically, I think, where fracking was invented virtually. They were fracking in town, next to schools, next to the grocery store, that type of thing. And the citizens of Denton voted in a referendum to ban fracking. The Texas state government stepped in and overturned that ban, saying that they didn't have competence over that. But anyway, the main thing is that they do not base their studies on the science, and then they say, oh well, the citizens or the government has to prove that it's dangerous rather than them having to prove that it's safe. So simply putting in a constitutional provision that says all studies which inform public policy must be based on empirical science, and also must be binding, that they can't ignore the scientific evidence when it comes to that. The same goes for social policy, because I remember during the 1990s, following the welfare debate, and all of these studies from these crock think tanks like the American Enterprise Institute and these other ones that just did not. They were just bogus studies. But the thing is that the Republicans believed it, or they took it in and they implemented it into the welfare policy, which has only served to dramatically increase the poverty level in the United States. And again, these are flawed ideological studies which have informed policy to a degree that they never should have. So that's another. So simply, again, a constitutional provision stating that all studies that inform public policy shall be peer-reviewed and legally binding, or binding on the decision, that they must be considered, would go a long way towards making the Constitution and specifically public policy much more effective, because you're using real life experience and real life evidence from a variety of sources, but provided that they are methodologically valid. The final one I want to talk about for the next few minutes is the corruption of the press. Now, I don't have to, and I don't have to tell you, as independence fans and or people who are considering, or even people who are just considering whether or not to vote yes or no and what the possibilities are, the role of the BBC, for example, in the previous referendum, and just go to London Calling, the movie, which I had the pleasure of participating in, to see to which the degree the BBC and other media have to completely obscured the arguments for in favor of independence, because they're obviously they're unionist papers, they're beholden to people who want the union to maintain its privilege and the status quo, and so what I would suggest is first of all that when independence is achieved, that the BBC license fee of £150 or so, that's maybe lowered and rediverted to a citizens media fund, a Scottish citizens media fund, and what you could do is have a set up an administration whereby there are grants given to individuals and companies to produce media output and to make news programs, and because broadcasting will no longer be a reserved matter. I mean, the Scottish government will have control power over broadcasting in Scotland, so they can do that. That's part of what independence would mean. But rather than having something like the BBC, which becomes a petrified, corrupt administration over the years. I mean, the two words Jimmy Savile should say everything you need to know about how corrupt the BBC has become and arguably still is. And so, and that's fine for when you talk. I don't know, when you talk about TV shows or whatever. Who cares? But when it comes to news, these things are obviously very important, and you can see over the years the way in which the media in Scotland, which is almost universally owned outside of Scotland, has talked Scotland down. All they talk about is the negative things. And for example, when I first heard about the independence referendum, I thought that they would, on the media, they'd be, oh, you could do this, you could do that, all these great possibilities that would open up if if Scotland voted for independence in 2014. And of course, that's not what you saw at all. Warning, risk, Scotland screwed, Alex Salmond's evil. That's all you got from the mainstream media. And so, but now having a media regulator, unlike Ofcom, I believe it's Ofcom in the UK, which is a wholly ineffectual organization, where you could have a Scottish media monitoring organization that is able to not to infringe in the freedom of speech, but be able to grade or rate the media outlets depending on their accuracy and their bias. And there are ways of measuring this. If you look at John Robertson's study on the BBC prior to the 2014 referendum, this is a perfect example, because he was able to say give these different classes of the way that the media is biased and why it was somewhat subtle. Maybe in the case of the BBC, sometimes there are ways of measuring bias, and so. And also, there's obviously ways of measuring accuracy. And so, for example, if you had a publication like the Daily Mail, which lies and is one of the most demagogic, rancid, god-awful publications on the face of this planet, and to think that institution and the editor has so much influence over the UK government and is able to poison the political dialogue so much that you have the Brexit vote, you have all of these campaigns against immigrants and etc., and which is a large reason why mostly England has there's rise in hate crimes, there's all kinds of very negative effects from this horrifically demagogic press outlets like the Mail, the Express, the Sun, Rupert Murdoch's papers, all that, and also the fact that editors like Paul Dacre of the Daily Mail and Rupert Murdoch have such a huge influence over the UK government, and it would be absolutely horrific to have any of these editors, media moguls, even close to having the influence over an independent Scottish government that they currently do over the UK government. And so what could be constitution without invading, violating the freedom of press in any ways, is simply to have a media, a constitutionally mandated media oversight group, which rates the different news outlets based on their accuracy and their retraction. If they make a mistake, everybody makes mistakes. There's no problem with that. But instantaneous corrections. Whereas now people have to make complaints, and maybe 8 months later there's some kind of little correction or something like that. But that's not good enough. I mean, you need to have real time corrections to that, and there's ways of measuring, bias, demagogy, all of these things. There can be objective measures done for that, and so for now, as you know, if you buy, a tin of beans, then they have to have the ingredients on that, and it can be rated. And if the ingredients are poisonous or bad, it can be taken off the market. And the same should be true with the press. If they are obviously and again, in this internet age, you can't stop every news blogger from doing it, from blogging, and you can't stop people from expressing themselves, and that of course includes publications like the Daily Mail. However, they can legally be graded and rated by a government agency. With using objective criteria, where anybody can go and see the studies and see why they were given that rating based on established criteria that certainly could be developed. Maybe John Robertson would be willing to help us out with that. So in a constitution, again, having that there be a citizens media fund created that would grant money for media ventures, as long, at least with the news ones, as long as they followed by these established criteria of accuracy and non-bias and all of these things. And it has nothing to do with the political persuasion. It hasn't. I mean, it's more that, again, that people get accuracy in what they're hearing, because so many people, looking at the United States, you look at people who watch Fox News, another Rupert Murdoch gem, and how they can become paranoid and schizophrenic practically, and just simply because of all of the things all the lies that they hear on the news. And well, there's freedom of press. Yeah, they can say that, they can do that, but the government should also have the right to rate that and have non-ideological, non-political ways of measuring the rhetoric and the facts, and pointing out what ones are accurate, ones and then forcing obliging them to immediately correct themselves if they want to have media accreditation. For example, maybe in the Scottish Parliament, they could only extend media accreditation to news outlets which follow these objective criteria and make a passing grade. Now, again, that's not to say people don't make mistakes, or there's misreporting, there's misinformation. Of course, I mean, especially in breaking events, people can only kind of hypothesize sometime. But once the truth is clear, demonstrably clear, that there should be there should be instantaneous corrections or retractions, and to keep them honest and to keep their media accreditation. So I think the main thing running through all of these three things is that all of these things be provably accurate. The voting, it should be incumbent on the voting agencies to prove that this was an accurate election, that this was validly measured and thoroughly transparent and democratic. This will help to make move Scotland as close to a democratic ideal as possible. Also, any information used to make public policy is provably accurate. I think this would also help because it would encourage really good research that would meet the standard to actually be used and implemented into government policy, which is what these think tanks are supposed to be all about, and is actually influencing it, but only being able to influence them if they are accurate, not if they're just ideologically driven dogma. And finally, that the media must be able to be held to account to where they are provably accurate, and that they must be held to objective criteria. Again, this doesn't stop anybody from writing anything, but it does mean that those media which are accredited and considered valid, must follow these criteria of accuracy and valid methodology. And again, these are measures which can be determined. John Robertson showed us that in his study of the BBC prior to the referendum. So those are my just ideas, and I haven't necessarily integrated all of these into my constitutional draft, but go to the Independence Live blog, have a look at the draft constitution that I've formulated. Feel free to make comments in the coming weeks. I hope to turn it into a Wikipedia type format where you can go and make suggestions. I'll also make a word. You can always send me an email, mmcnaught1@gmail.com, mmcnaught letter 1. Number 1, at gmail.com. Ask me some questions. I'll be happy to send you a Word version of the Constitution, and you can play around with it, play around with the wording, put in your ideas. And also, if you have other draft constitutions or ideas, send them on, and we can always publish multiple constitutions and have different choices, and say, okay, if there's maybe somebody wants to have a constitution which keeps the monarch for the head of state, all right, bring it out, and what would be the role of the monarch, how would it, all of these things. I'm not by limiting my by stating what I see as a valid constitution. That's not at all to say that other ideas aren't valid, and that other considerations can't be made. One last thing is that one of the comments on Twitter today was speaking about the fact that I was advocating a secular republic, and the fear that might divide the Yes movement somehow. And so I want to say, first of all, that I'll be my next show in 1 week will be on exactly that. What do I mean by a secular republic? Because I want to explain clearly. Because when people hear secularism, they often think of militant atheism or kind of anti-religious, which it's not at all. And so I'll explain that in more detail next week. But I just wanted to again share with you this evening my thoughts on what constitutional provisions could be introduced to reduce corruption as much as possible. I hope you'll have a think about what I've said and send me on suggestions if you can think of other things, particularly in the area of the press. How can we make a decent press in Scotland for an informed citizenry that is not nearly as just horrifically corrupt and bought as the media that Scotland currently enjoys, hopefully present company excluded. Okay, thank you very much, and have a lovely week, and I will be back next week speaking more about what I mean by a secular republic. Goodbye.
I'm back. Can you hear me? Good. Yes, so we got let's see, a couple of questions. Just looking for at Fiona. Let's see, Fiona Graham. Wouldn't a media oversight be a way of limiting press freedom? I think that there can be a case made for a body which oversees accuracy of the media. I think that freedom of the media is fine and very important and very valid. But at the same time, I think that if a media outlet chooses to deliberately lie, that they should be able to be labeled as such. And that's just my view, and I don't think that impinges on freedom of speech. I mean, it's like if you're making a product and the product gets evaluated in a certain way, or like what's the contents are, whether it's good for you or not, just like any other consumer product, whether a toaster is going to catch on fire or something like that. I think the same thing is true with media, where you should be able, a government should be able to evaluate it and state its opinion, not necessarily from a political point of view. I think it could be from a point of view of, um, accuracy, and whether or not it, to what degree it might be biased in measurable, quantifiable ways without it being an infringement. It's not an infringement to pass judgment on something or some media outlet. So that's just my view. Anyway, yeah. So do we get some other questions, David, or do you have some questions or comments on the video? Sure. Uh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Hold on just one sec. Yeah, so from what David said, the editor of the Daily Mail actually got cannabis reclassified as a Class B as a deal favorable to coverage from Gordon Brown. Yeah. Um, yeah, let's see. Any, let's see, I'm not sure how to interpret that at this point, but do we have any other questions from the audience at this point, either on the live stream or the Facebook feed? That's fine. That's fine. Okay. All right. No biggie. Okay. Well, we'll leave it that for this evening. I hope you enjoyed the commentary I made about corruption. I will, in the coming weeks, talk about more direct corruption in terms of campaign finance and the corruption of actual politicians in terms of making policy in an independent Scotland. I will do that very presently. But thank you for watching, and I really appreciate it. And I hope you listen to my upcoming podcasts. Thank you very much.